Good morning. Today on Spotlight, a topic we don't explore on a regular basis, but one that surrounds us every day. The topic, architecture, and the Detroiter who during his career was one of the most prolific architects in the world. His name, Albert Kahn. Last month marked 150 years since his birth. Today we'll talk to Professor Claire Zimmerman of the University of Michigan, Alan Cobb, President and CEO of Kahn and Associates, Carol Kahn, the great architect's granddaughter, and Michael Hodges, fine arts writer at the Detroit News and the author of Building the Modern World, Albert Kahn in Detroit. It's Sunday, April the 28th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. I'm going to start with you, Alan. You're president and CEO of the firm that carries his name. If I say, give me a ballpark figure of how many buildings, how many projects, I don't know what you say in architectural terms, that Albert Kahn did in his career, what would you say?
Well, he was very prolific. And we look at about 20,000 projects that he was involved in, and perhaps about 30,000 jobs.
That's a lot.
Many jobs being at the same site and on the same buildings that he had done previously. So.
And you gave me a comparison in the green room to the amount of time that you've been an architect and how many projects. How does that compare, so to speak?
This topic has come up, so I tried to count at one point how many projects I've been involved in. It may be 4,000 or something. So that shows you the
You've
difference.
been an architect for how long?
About 44 years now.
All right, yeah. So he kind of surpassed you in a little way. Okay, doesn't mean you haven't been working hard. It just means he really worked hard. All right. Michael Hodges, he has been called the architect of Detroit, but in reality, he was much more than just the architect of Detroit, correct?
Yeah, I mean, he built much of what we consider to be old Detroit, as well as much of the old part of the University of Michigan. But his industrial work was constructed all around the world. And in many respects, it's his industrial work that makes him sort of a really significant figure in architectural history.
Professor Zimmerman, you teach a course in Kahn. What is it you teach and what is it you try to get across to those young architectural students?
What modernism really was, that is to say what it meant to be modern, is really what Kahn has showed us, and Michael's book does a great job of talking about that. I try to point out to them how little attention he's received in the history of architecture over time. And
why do you think that is?
I think that is in part because of his association with the so-called military-industrial complex that came out of World War II. I think it is also because after World War II, architects didn't want to own factories as part of their area of competence. They wanted to be artists, and those two things together meant that he didn't really have a place in the picture. And so he basically was dropped out for a long, long time, being picked up again in the mid-70s briefly, and then again in 2001, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and now again in 2017. So I think we're still coming to terms with his contribution to the 20th century, to the American century, actually.
Carol Kahn, this is your grandfather that we're talking about.
Yes.
If he were still living, we would have just celebrated his 150th birthday in March. What goes through your mind when you hear people talking about him and all that he did and the impact that he had on architecture and so many other things?
So this is a man that I never knew because I wasn't born. He died in 42, I was born in 55. So I'm the child, one of the children of his only son, Eddie. What goes through my mind, anything from just wonder at hearing about now Midway to just a sense of wonder, awe, and then a sense of sort of grief because I never knew this man. So here's this incredible legacy, and I walk into his buildings today, Hill Auditorium, Fisher Building, the Grad Library, Clements Library.
At the University of Michigan.
Yeah, or into a building that's being
He pretty much built the University of Michigan.
Yeah,
The last
did.
count was what, 35, maybe
Right.
35 buildings there?
But I walk into one of those buildings that's being redone, say Willow Run Airport, and I burst into tears. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Lots of emotions.
Do you feel like he is finally getting the recognition he is due?
I think it's going to take a long time for us to really understand what he accomplished, what he and his family accomplished. It's absolutely incredible, absolutely amazing. From the blueprinting process that his sister developed, Molly Kahn Fuchs, to his brother Julius basically inventing a system of reinforced concrete that changed the whole way of building factories in the world.
We'll be right back. We hope you stay with us. He came here, he was a German Jew. He came to America, young age. He was basically penniless, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, his father brought him, who was a rabbi.
His father came first, actually, a year ahead of the family, and then Albert followed with the rest of the family. He was only 11 when he came here, but he was the chief sort of head of the family because he spoke some English.
All right. He had no formal education. I mean, he never went to college, correct?
No.
Yeah.
But he was able to get a very key position, role, as an apprentice in the office of Mason and Rice. And he rose very quickly as one of the very active and interesting architects in the office.
In addition to all that he built in Detroit and in Michigan and up in Ann Arbor, that he built oodles of buildings in Russia, of all places, and other parts of Europe. Why, Professor?
He was invited by the Soviet government to help them industrialize. The first 5-year plan that Joseph Stalin instigated was designed to rapidly industrialize a non-industrial country that couldn't make tractors, couldn't make automobiles, couldn't produce enough wheat or grain from the vast amounts of land that were arable land. They couldn't produce the kind of quantity that we could produce. So they went to Henry Ford. Henry Ford directed them to Albert Kahn, and they hired him to come to set up a branch office in Moscow and build factories. They started with 2 factories that were produced in Pennsylvania and New York and shipped overseas and erected on site. And then they produced another 519 or 521, depending on how you count, from a branch office that they set up in Moscow and that they used as a center for projects all over the Soviet Union.
But there was also the residential side, all the magnificent homes that he built.
He loved art. He was an artist. He was a gifted pianist when he was probably 8 years old and then converted that artistic energy.
Some say he may have been a prodigy.
He could have been a prodigy, yeah. But he loved art and had an eye for art, so he would take time to build buildings like residences like Edsel Ford Home, which is just an absolutely beautiful thing, where he brought over the architecture from England, from the Tudor, the Cotswolds, or am I saying it right?
Yes,
yeah.
right.
The other piece that we haven't touched on is he got a scholarship to travel in Europe for about a year, $500 scholarship, and how many sketches did he draw from Europe? So he brought over the architecture from Europe with these sketches.
He was there for a year in 1891, and he brought back over 400 sketches, and they're beautiful sketches. Many are housed at the U of M Art Museum. We have a few in the office as well. But he was a fantastic artist as well as an architect.
All right, I'm going to sneak another break in. When we come back, I want to pick up with you. I want to talk about this relationship between Albert Kahn and Henry Ford. Michael Hodges, talk about this relationship between Albert Kahn and Henry Ford. Very different background.
Yeah, he pretty much built most of the Ford factories around the world. I think that, you know, the two men were both uneducated men in formal terms. Kahn never got beyond elementary school. And they were each practical geniuses, sort of do-it-yourself kind of guys. And I think they recognized that in each other, and I think admired one another. Henry Ford in particular, I think, liked Kahn because Kahn had not gone to college, and Ford reportedly despised men who sounded like they had gone to college or university. It drove him crazy.
A little uppity, yeah.
Yeah. And in Kahn, I think he found somebody that he felt resembled himself and that he could deeply admire.
Professor, it's been well documented, the anti-Semitism that Henry Ford was involved in the Dearborn Independent newspaper. How is it that someone who was young and Jewish and not a formal education was able to get these kind of contracts during a time where anti-Semitism was pretty rampant in America and other places throughout the world?
Yeah, that's a bit of a mystery, and I often wondered how Kahn could go on working for someone who was so violently anti-Semitic. But I think there were several things at play. One, Kahn was incredibly good at what he did, and he was better than anyone else that Henry Ford could have found to build these very complex, very large factories very quickly, and in fact to invent them. This is really the invention of a new building type. So Kahn was good enough that Ford didn't want to look anywhere else, I think. And in fact, I think Ford did make a kind of a separation in his mind between the people that he knew and the class of people that he called Jewish. So that to me explains why Ford worked with Kahn. He certainly restricted Kahn to certain kinds of buildings. He didn't help him get other kinds of commissions.
He was a man who was very skilled in dealing with people from all backgrounds, all manners of being, people who he might have described as stuffed shirts. He would try to work with them, I'm sure. There's in the letters between my grandfather and his wife, Ernestine Crowlett Kahn, there's a letter where he's saying to her, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to continue working with Ford. So he definitely, within the family,
had thoughts about it,
he
and
was
there was
definitely
probably tension at times.
Lots of tension. He was describing it to his wife and sort of using her as a sounding board to make decisions about. But he really was so devoted to the men that worked for him that he wanted to continue with these contracts.
It was his payroll, I think.
Yeah.
Right. The Packard plant played a key role in terms of him really getting that first big contract to do an automotive plant. Did I read that correctly? And that may have helped him get the stuff that he got with Ford and other automakers, the GM building, others?
Yes. Kahn had done some residential work for Henry Joy, who ends up being the head of Packard. And then Joy approached him and said, I want to build this factory way out on East Grand Boulevard, and I'd like you to do it. And Kahn initially said, you know, I've never done a factory. You'd be a little foolish to hire me. And Joy said, well, that doesn't matter. You're my guy. So Kahn builds the first 9 buildings at Packard Motor out of standard old-fashioned masonry construction. But with building number 10 in 1905, he erects one of the pioneering reinforced concrete buildings with massive amounts of windows and great airy sort of loft-like interiors. That was a huge leap forward in industrial and architectural design.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Okay, we know that there's a lot of archival stuff going on at the Bentley at the University of Michigan. Also, Lawrence Tech University is doing some stuff, and I guess some stuff is at the Smithsonian. Any place else? There's a lot of places.
Well, we still have a good deal of the archives in our offices, and we've maintained them for many, many years, you know. And it's a source of future work for us. I mean, the same clients come back to us that Albert served, you know, in the early 1900s.
All right. Diego Rivera, he had a relationship with him. Certainly everybody knows about the wonderful mural at the Detroit Institute of Arts. What was the relationship?
Well, Kahn was a City of Detroit Arts Commissioner, so he was on the board that approved the murals in the first place. So when Diego and Frida arrived in Detroit, they met Kahn and probably all the other commissioners. Kahn ends up being a supporter of Rivera throughout the process. He particularly liked the huge murals, the north and south walls, though he found the naked gods reclining on top of everything kind of weird. Wasn't a big fan. But when the murals came under really vicious conservative attack, religious attacks in 1933 when they opened, mostly because of the so-called vaccination panel, Albert Kahn gave an interview to my newspaper, the Detroit News, in which he said that anyone who didn't recognize that Mr. Rivera had put Detroit on the world artistic map was a dolt, in effect, and was really the only prominent voice that stood up for the murals when they were being attacked, before Edsel Ford finally said, I think Mr. Rivera did very well by Detroit history.
Right. The home that he lived in is now the headquarters of the Detroit Urban League, which sits right there on Mack in the New Center area. Carol, have you had a chance to even go through there?
Yes, I've been through there at least once, maybe twice. And Charles Anderson took us around, this is many years ago. I went to Wayne State Nursing School, so I was just down from there. But what Mr. Anderson would always say was that the ghost of Albert Kahn was still in the home, which was lovely.
Right.
It's a beautiful, beautiful place.
It is a beautiful building.
Yeah, and they had a beautiful, beautiful art collection in a back room that was added on to just for the purposes of this art collection that they had as a family.
And Detroit is very lucky that the Urban League acquired that home, because all the other good homes to the east of it mostly fell apart and were abandoned. But the Urban League was able to preserve it in good shape, and Detroit really owes them a big thanks.
Alan Cobb, as president and CEO of Albert Kahn and Associates, what do you think Albert Kahn would think of what is going on in Detroit today, and many of these buildings that some became abandoned, some went into not so good shape, and now they're being brought back to life with Dan Gilbert and other people?
I think he would be so proud. You know, he designed over 1,000 buildings in the city of Detroit, and over 500 are still, you know, alive and well, and to see them brought back, to see the energy in Detroit, I think he would really relish the situation right now. And really, I think you mentioned before about you know, what the best kind of project, or what the sort of primary project would be. It's really, I think, the diversity, the differences in the work that Kahn did.
Yeah, they did homes. We haven't even talked about the churches.
Right. They were all focused on
the
users, the people, the workplace. Great natural light, great natural ventilation, good places to be. And so they survive today because they're wonderful places to work and be in. And so I think they're valuable.
I think I read in Michael's book that someone quoted and said that his favorite building, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is the Clements Library at the University of Michigan. True or false? True?
True.
To the best of our knowledge.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So all of you are experts on Kahn in your own right. Do you have a favorite Kahn building of any type?
Well, for me, it has to be the industrial work and the Rouge glass plant, which is just a phenomenal piece. Part of it still remains. Part has been demolished. It set the tone, and it became a touch point, really, to modern architecture.
Okay. Professor Zimmerman?
This is a tough one. Burroughs Plymouth is a plant, an industrial plant, late 1938, I think, that I love.
Where's that?
In Plymouth, Michigan.
Plymouth?
The
Okay.
powerhouse in particular is like a cathedral. I'm also a big fan of the Temple Bethel No. 2, which needs some restoration help. There's a lot more, but those are two of my favorites.
All right. Carol?
Oh my goodness.
And we haven't even talked about the sports side of the
No, we
Kahn
haven't.
family in the University of
No.
Michigan,
No,
which
we
is
won't- we
significant.
don't-
We'll have to do that the next
Yes,
show, but
sounds good.
people, or they can go read Michael's
Yeah.
book and others too.
So I would say there's a plant in Buffalo, New York, the Pierce Aero plant, which is really an early building.
Right.
That's being redone, and I just read about it the other day. There's some really neat new history about it that I just read about. And then the Livingstone Memorial, is it a
Lighthouse.
lighthouse on Belle Isle, and then anything on Belle Isle. Part of it is because people are bringing back, like the Belle Isle Conservancy is bringing back the scripts, not the library, but the Conservancy, the Conservatory, thank you. And then the aquarium. And I want to shout out to all those people who, like, there's a guy, I won't say his name because he's trying to be somewhat anonymous. He polished and cleaned all the tiles in the Belle Isle Aquarium by hand on the weekends, according to his wife.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, we know wives don't lie. Right.
Yes, we do.
All right, Michael?
I think one of my favorite buildings is Hill Auditorium at the University of Michigan. It reminds me a little of some Louis Sullivan work, and I think it's just this sort of wonderful, grave, ponderous building with a lot of authority.
All right, very good. All right, once again, Michael's written his book. It's called Building the Modern World, Albert Kahn in Detroit. If you want to get a lot more information about Albert Kahn and his impact on the world, Professor Zimmerman's book is coming out. TBA. Call us and let us know when it comes out. All right. Professor Zimmerman, thank you for coming in. Alan Cobb, thank you. Carol Kahn and Michael Hodges, thank you so much. And finally, if you're wondering how the firm Albert Kahn founded is doing today, the answer is great. It employs about 125 professionals headquartered in Detroit's historic Fisher Building. It also has offices in Miami, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and field offices in Erie, Pennsylvania, and Chicago. International projects are currently underway in Sweden, Qatar, Israel, and Vietnam. And oh yeah, they're still doing a lot of work in the city of Detroit. For more details, go to our website at WXYZ.com. I'm Chuck Stokes. Have a great day.